The late autumn wind swept through Central Park, tossing amber leaves across the gray stone paths. Two brothers sat quietly on an old bench, Mason and Andrew Miller, 22 and 23, their coats too thin for the cold, their hands wrapped around paper cups of cooling coffee. Between them sat a faded red vintage car model, a collector's piece from their late father. To anyone else, it was just an old toy. To them, it was the last thing he'd given them before he passed away. Mason rubbed his palms together and murmured, "Somebody's going to buy this, Drew. It's worth more than it looks. We just need one person to stop." Andrew nodded slowly, eyes scanning the flow of people hurrying by. Joggers, tourists, professionals with too many deadlines to notice two brothers sitting in the cold. They hadn't eaten since yesterday. But hunger wasn't the main thing pressing on their minds. Their mother, Emily Miller, was at home, pale, breath shallow, fighting a kidney condition that had gone untreated for months. Just before we begin, I want to thank everyone who's been subscribing, liking, and sharing. It means more than you know. If you're new here, please subscribe and tell me where you're watching from. I love giving shout-outs to my viewers in the next story. They had tried everything: extra shifts, small loans, selling their furniture. But the latest medical bill had crushed what little hope remained. "Let's move closer to the entrance," Andrews suggested, nodding toward the plaza where more people gathered. "Maybe someone will notice." They stood up, rubbing warmth back into their fingers, and walked toward the crowd. Their breath fogged in the air as they spoke softly to strangers. "Excuse me, sir. Would you like to buy this? It's a collectible. We're trying to raise money for our mom's treatment." Most people smiled politely and kept walking. Some ignored them completely. Mason's voice cracked. "It's okay," he muttered. "We'll find someone." But inside, both brothers felt the same ache, the humiliation of being invisible. Across the street, a black Mercedes slowed to a stop near the park's edge. Inside sat James Sanders, 42, founder and CEO of Sanders Enterprises, a man whose time was usually priced at $10,000 an hour. He'd built a billion-dollar tech empire from nothing but discipline and grit. And yet, as he looked out at the city that once symbolized his success, he felt nothing but fatigue. He loosened his tie and told his driver, "I need a walk. Pick me up on the east exit in 15. The chauffeur nodded, confused. James rarely deviated from schedule. As he stepped onto the path, the cold air hit his face like a reminder that he was still alive. He tucked his hands into his coat pockets and began walking, briskly, mechanically, until a voice stopped him. "Sir, would you like to buy this?" He turned. Two young men stood before him, weary but polite, their breath white in the chill. The taller one held up the red model car like it was made of gold. "It's in great condition," Andrew said quickly, forcing a hopeful smile. "Vintage, from 1985. We're selling it to pay for our mom's treatment." For a second, James said nothing. His first instinct was to wave them off. Another pitch, another sad story. But something in their faces, the sincerity, the exhaustion, made him pause. He took the car gently, examining the small scratches and faded paint. "Who does it belong to?" he asked. "It was our dad's," Mason replied quietly. "It's all we have left from him. But right now, our mom needs it more." James looked up sharply. Their eyes, tired, glassy, hit him like a mirror of something he'd long buried. "How much are you asking?" he said finally. Andrew hesitated. "Whatever you can give, sir. Anything helps." Without another word, James pulled out his wallet and handed them a few large bills. Their eyes widened. "Sir, this is too much." "Keep it," James said simply. "You'll need it more than I do." Mason exhaled, almost shaking. "Thank you, sir. You don't know what this means." James nodded once, slipping the red car into his pocket. As the brothers hurried off, Clutching the money with trembling hands, he stood there, unmoving. The cold no longer biting, the city no longer loud. Something had shifted. He watched them disappear into the subway station. Two strangers who'd somehow cracked open a silence inside him. He turned to his driver when the car returned. "Follow them," he said quietly. The driver blinked. "Sir?" "I said follow them." The car trailed the brothers through the maze of old brick buildings in Brooklyn's industrial district, where flickering street lamps cast long shadows across the cracked pavement. James watched as they entered a small, run-down apartment complex. Peeling paint, rusted railings, no elevator. He didn't know why he cared, only that something inside him refused to look away. When the door shut behind them, he sat back and stared at the red car in his hand. It was just a trinket, plastic, chipped, meaningless. But holding it made him feel something he hadn't felt in years, something close to human. James sat in the back seat of his Mercedes, the city blurring past as he turned the small red toy car over in his hand. The paint was chipped, one wheel loose, but it carried a strange gravity, the kind that didn't belong to ordinary things. He didn't know what possessed him to say it, but the words left his mouth before reason could intervene. "Stop the car." The driver glanced up in the mirror. "Here, sir?" "Yes?" The car rolled to a quiet stop in front of the crumbling apartment building the brothers had entered minutes earlier. The place looked exhausted. Bricks stained by time, metal grates rattling against cracked windows, and a faint flicker from one working light bulb in the hallway. James slipped the toy into his coat pocket and stepped out into the chill. Every instinct told him to turn back. This wasn't his world. He didn't belong here. But something about the look in those young men's eyes, desperation mixed with dignity, had pierced through his carefully built armor. He climbed the narrow stairs, his polished shoes echoing on the concrete steps. On the 4th floor, faint voices filtered through a slightly open door. "Mom, he gave us so much money. We can buy the medicine now." James hesitated, then knocked softly. The voices went silent. A few seconds later, the door creaked open. Mason stood there, surprised, his expression flickering from confusion to alarm. "It's you," Mason said cautiously. James cleared his throat. "May I come in for a moment?" Andrew appeared behind his brother, equally wary. "Why?" James glanced past them and saw a figure lying on a worn-out sofa. A woman, her breathing shallow, her face pale. "I wanted to make sure your mother was all right," he said simply. The brothers exchanged looks, unsure whether to trust him. Finally, Andrew stepped aside. "She's resting. Don't wake her." James entered quietly. The apartment was small, one room that doubled as kitchen, living room, and sleeping space. It was clean, though clearly aged by years of struggle. He moved closer to the woman. Even under the dim light, he could see her condition. Her hands were frail, her lips dry. "She needs a doctor," James said. "We know," Mason answered softly. "But the hospital wants a deposit. That's what we were trying to raise." James took a slow breath. "What's her name?" "Emily Miller," Andrew said. He looked at her again. The name stirred something faint, a chord of recognition he couldn't place. "How long has she been like this?" "A few weeks," Mason said. "She was working 2 jobs after Dad passed. But lately, she can't even stand without fainting." James ran a hand through his hair, his instinctive corporate voice, the one that solved crises with cold efficiency, took over. "She needs to be in a hospital tonight. No waiting." Andrew looked up, defensive. "We can't afford—" "I didn't ask if you could," James interrupted gently. "Get your coats." The brothers froze. "What do you mean?" Mason asked. "I mean, I'm taking her to the hospital. Now." Andrew's jaw tightened. We don't even know you. Why would you help us? James looked at him, eyes steady. Because somebody should have helped me once. And no one did. That answer seemed to silence every question in the room. Minutes later, James carefully lifted Emily in his arms. She stirred faintly but didn't wake. Mason grabbed her handbag, Andrew locked the door, and together they hurried down the stairs. The driver jumped out when he saw James carrying the woman. Sir. To the nearest hospital, James ordered. The Mercedes glided through the night, city lights flashing across Emily's fragile face. Andrew held her hand tightly while Mason sat rigid, still processing what was happening. Who are you? Mason finally asked. James Sanders, he said. Andrew's brow furrowed. Sanders? The tech guy? The one on TV? James gave a brief nod. Mason exhaled. So, this is charity? No, James said quietly. It's human decency. At the hospital, chaos met order. Doctors and nurses rushed forward as soon as they saw Emily's condition. James moved like a man possessed, signing forms, flashing his insurance card, and demanding immediate care. When a nurse hesitated over patient authorization, he said simply, "She's under my care now. Treat her." The medical team worked swiftly. Within minutes, Emily was on IV fluids, oxygen, and being wheeled toward intensive observation. James stood by the glass wall of the emergency unit, motionless. He had seen hundreds of hospital rooms, sterile, efficient, distant, but this one hit differently. Behind that glass lay a stranger who somehow felt connected to him. He turned as Mason approached, voice trembling. They said she's stable for now. Thank you. James nodded but didn't look away from the glass. You can stay here tonight. I'll take care of the bills. Andrew blinked. We can't let you do that. You can, James replied, tone firm. And you will. He looked at them, two grown men who had sold their father's keepsake just to keep their mother alive. Formierend, Samiarum Samrain Silver the saying. Sighed, him cracked. I'll come back tomorrow, he said, then paused. Do you have anywhere else to go? They shook their heads. Then I'll send a driver in the morning. Pack your things. You'll stay at my house until she's recovered. What? Mason said, startled. You don't even know us. James looked at him steadily. I know enough. He didn't wait for an answer. He just turned and walked down the sterile hallway, the red toy car heavy in his pocket, as if it were pulling him towards something he didn't yet understand. That night, sleep didn't come easily. In his penthouse overlooking the skyline, James sat in darkness with a drink in hand, watching the lights flicker across glass towers. He could hear his assistant's voice from earlier that day, the one that said, "You can't save everyone, sir." But, for once, he didn't agree. Because when he looked into those brothers' faces, he didn't see everyone. He saw the version of himself he'd buried. The one who knew what it meant to lose everything. And that realization kept him awake, long after the city went quiet. The soft beep of the heart monitor filled the hospital room, steady and rhythmic. Morning light crept through the blinds, striping the white walls in thin golden lines. Emily Miller stirred, her lashes fluttering weakly. Her head ached. Her throat was dry. But the first thing she saw when she opened her eyes wasn't the ceiling she'd grown used to. It was a hospital room she didn't recognize. And sitting by her bedside were her two sons. Andrew's head rested against the mattress, eyes half open with exhaustion. Mason was slumped in a chair, still holding her hand. Andrew, Emily whispered, her voice rough. He woke instantly. Mom, you're awake. Mason sat up, his expression lighting up like sunrise. Where are we? Emily asked, her voice trembling. What happened? You fainted again, Mason said softly. But you're okay now. You're in the hospital. They said your kidneys were failing. They're treating it. Treating? She repeated, alarm flaring. How? We didn't have money. The door opened before either of them could answer. A man in a charcoal suit stepped inside. His presence calm but commanding. "Good morning," he said. "I'm James Sanders. You're safe now, Mrs. Miller." Emily blinked, confused. "I don't understand." Andrew stood. "He's the one who helped us, Mom. The man who bought Dad's car. He brought you here." James gave a polite nod. "You needed urgent care. Your sons didn't hesitate to act, and neither did I." Emily tried to sit up, wincing. "You paid for all this?" "Yes." "I can't accept—" "You can," James interrupted, his voice steady but kind. "And you will. Focus on getting better. The rest can wait." Her lips parted to argue, but the words dissolved into silence. Something about his tone, firm yet gentle, disarmed her. He turned to the brothers. "The doctor said she'll need long-term dialysis and supervised care. I'll handle the medical logistics. In the meantime, I'd like you both to come stay at my home." "What?" Emily gasped. "No, that's not necessary." "It is," James replied simply. "You need a stable place to recover. Your boys need rest. I have more than enough space." Mason frowned, torn between gratitude and confusion. "Why are you doing this for us, Mr. Sanders? We're strangers." James paused, long enough for the hum of the monitor to fill the silence. "Because once," he said quietly, "I lost someone I loved. And no one was there to help." Later that afternoon, James waited near the hospital entrance as discharge papers were signed. Emily sat in a wheelchair, her sons on either side of her, both protective and hesitant. When the sleek black Mercedes pulled up, her brows furrowed. "That's your car?" James smiled faintly. "One of them." She looked embarrassed. "I don't think we belong in something like that." "You belong where you're safe," James said. "That's all that matters." As they drove through the city, the world outside shifted from concrete and noise to quiet roads lined with trees. Emily gazed out the window, dazed. "Where are we going?" "My home," James replied. "It's in Westchester, peaceful. You'll have a full-time nurse until you're stronger." Mason whispered to Andrew, "This feels unreal." Andrew nodded. "Yeah, like we walked into someone else's life." When the car turned through an iron gate, Emily's breath caught. The Sanders estate spread before them. A sprawling modern mansion with glass walls, perfectly trimmed lawns, and a fountain at the center drive. She gripped the armrest. "This is unbelievable." James stepped out first, helping her gently from the car. "Welcome. You can think of this as temporary until you're ready to be on your feet again." A housekeeper, Mrs. Sanchez, appeared at the door, warm but cautious, like a woman used to quiet order suddenly facing disruption. "Mr. Sanders," she greeted, her accent soft. "These are the guests?" "Yes," James said. "Prepare the guest wing. Mrs. Miller will need the downstairs suite near the garden. The young men can use the east rooms." Mrs. Sanchez nodded. "Of course." Emily looked overwhelmed. "I can't let you—" "You already have," James said, meeting her eyes. "You sold me that little red car. Now let me return the favor." Her lips trembled, but no words came. That evening the house was different. Laughter, light, cautious, but real, echoed faintly from the guest rooms. The sound startled James more than he cared to admit. For years, his home had been silent, a museum of luxury and loneliness. Tonight, that silence broke. He stood in his study, staring out the window, watching the faint glow of the guest wing lights. The red toy car sat on his desk, gleaming under the lamplight. His mind wandered. Back to a day years ago when he'd raced miniature cars across the marble floor with his own son. The memory burned and soothed all at once. He reached into the drawer and pulled out an old photograph. His wife and child, smiling on a beach in Maine. Both gone. Lost in the car crash that had shattered his world 5 years ago. He swallowed hard, set the photo face down, and whispered, "Maybe it's time." The next morning, Emily woke to sunlight spilling through soft curtains and the smell of freshly brewed coffee. For the first time in months. She didn't wake to pain, at least not the kind that came from fear and hunger. Mason knocked gently. "You okay, Mom?" She nodded. "Still feels like a dream." Andrew appeared behind him with a grin. "Mrs. Sanchez made pancakes. Real ones." Emily smiled faintly. "Go eat before they get cold." When they left, she looked out the window, at the garden, the fountain, the calm. It felt foreign but strangely healing. In the kitchen, James sat at the island reading through a digital report, his usual breakfast untouched. When Emily walked in, he stood automatically. "You should be resting," he said. "I've done enough resting," she replied gently. "You've done so much for us already, Mr. Sanders. I don't even know how to begin to repay you." "Then don't," he said simply. "Just get well." She hesitated, then smiled. "At least let me make you coffee tomorrow. It's something." For the first time in years, he laughed, a small, genuine sound. "Deal." They looked at each other, a moment too long, too quiet, before she turned away, cheeks faintly flushed. And somewhere deep inside him, a door that had long been locked began to creak open. Days melted into weeks, and the Sanders mansion, once a silent fortress of marble and glass, began to breathe again. Laughter echoed faintly down the halls now. The scent of fresh food replaced the sterile quiet that used to hang in the air. For James, it was disorienting. Every morning, he woke to sounds he hadn't heard in years. Footsteps in the kitchen, the clatter of plates, the hum of conversation. Life. At first, it unnerved him. But slowly, it started to heal him. Emily's health had improved. Dialysis, rest, and proper meals brought color back to her cheeks. She had even started to take small walks in the garden, wrapped in a shawl, her pace slow but steady. James often watched her from his study window, pretending to read, but his eyes drawn to her every step. One morning, as she walked along the edge of the fountain, she paused and looked up at his window. Their eyes met through the glass. He froze. Then she smiled, small, warm, knowing. And just like that, the day felt lighter. By mid-March, the brothers had found part-time work at a local hardware store nearby. They insisted on paying for groceries, though Mrs. Sanchez would always mutter, "Nonsense. Mr. Sanders can buy the whole city if he wants." For James, their presence had become strangely grounding. He began to look forward to dinner, to the stories, the teasing, the sound of human warmth that replaced the echo of loneliness. One evening, as he entered the dining room, Emily was already there, setting plates. She wore a soft blue dress that brought out the glow in her skin. "You don't have to do that," James said, stepping closer. "I know," she said, smiling. "But I like doing it. Reminds me I'm alive." Her hands brushed his briefly as she set down a fork. The touch lingered just long enough to make them both aware of it. "I made stew tonight," she added. "My boys tell me you skip real meals for espresso and meetings." He chuckled, the kind of laugh that started low in his chest. "They're not wrong." "Then tonight you eat," she said, almost like an order. When Mrs. Sanchez entered moments later, she found the billionaire CEO, a man whose life ran on power and precision, laughing over homemade stew with a woman who had nothing but warmth to give. And she thought quietly to herself, "He's finally human again." Later that night, after the dishes were cleared and the house had gone quiet, James stood alone in the hallway, in front of a closed door. It was the one room he never entered. His son's room. He hadn't touched it since the accident 5 years ago. He reached for the doorknob, hesitated, then dropped his hand. Not yet. He turned to leave, but a soft voice behind him made him stop. "James?" Emily stood at the end of the hall, barefoot, wrapped in her shawl. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked, gently. He forced a small smile. "I could ask you the same." She walked closer. The silence between them filled only by the soft creak of the wooden floor. Her eyes flicked to the door he'd been staring at. "That room. It's locked," she said softly. "Your son's?" His jaw tightened. "It was." Emily nodded slowly. "You don't have to talk about it." But he did. For the first time, he wanted to. "His name was Daniel," James said quietly. "He was 8. My wife, Claire. They were driving home from the coast. A truck ran a red light." Emily didn't move closer, but her eyes filled with empathy. "I'm sorry. I was supposed to be with them that night," he continued. "But I stayed late at the office. The meeting I thought couldn't wait. It cost me my family." Her heart clenched. "You can't blame yourself forever," she said softly. "I've tried to stop," he admitted. But the guilt became routine. Work was easier. "Numbers don't grieve. People do," she whispered. Their eyes met again, and for a moment neither of them were two strangers divided by class or circumstance. They were just two broken souls trying to find air again. "Sometimes," Emily said, her voice trembling, "the universe sends us people to remind us we're still capable of feeling, even when it hurts." James exhaled shakily. "You think that's what this is?" She smiled faintly. "I think we were both drowning. Maybe this is just us learning to breathe again." The air between them shifted, heavier, warmer. He took a slow step closer, but she gently shook her head. "Not yet," she said softly. "Healing first." He nodded, quietly, sincerely, and stepped back. "Good night, Emily." "Good night, James." That night, he didn't dream of car crashes or loss. He dreamed of light, soft, golden, and filled with laughter echoing through his once empty home. The next morning, a text from his executive assistant blinked across his phone. "Board reminder. Press conference tomorrow, 9 a.m., company anniversary. Need you present." He stared at the screen. For years, those words would have triggered pride. Now, they just felt hollow. When he came downstairs, Emily was making coffee, something he hadn't seen another person do in his kitchen in half a decade. "I thought you had people for that," she teased. "I do," he said, smiling faintly. "But your coffee smells better." She handed him a mug, and when their hands brushed again, he didn't pull away this time. "James," she said softly, "you've done so much for us. Let us do something for you, too." He raised an eyebrow. "Like what?" "Come back to life," she said. "For real this time." He held her gaze for a moment, the words sinking deeper than she knew. That night, as he stood by his office window looking out at the moonlit estate, he took out his phone and typed something impulsive. "Sometimes, the smallest act of kindness rewrites your whole story." Then he posted it to his private business page. His first personal post in years. The comments from colleagues flooded in. "Inspirational, sir. Hope you're doing well. Great message." But none of them understood the truth. It wasn't a quote. It was a confession. The morning of the press conference dawned sharp and cold. The kind of New York morning that cut through even the most expensive suit. James Sanders, polished, pressed, practiced, was back in the spotlight. Cameras clicked like static when he stepped out of his car. To the world, he was still the same billionaire visionary, the genius behind Sanders Enterprises. But inside, everything had changed. He had spent the night replaying Emily's words in his mind. Come back to life, for real this time. For the first time in years, He wasn't thinking about market share or quarterly forecasts. He was thinking about her laugh, her steadiness, the quiet way she made pain seem survivable. Inside the marble lobby, his assistant Clara rushed to meet him. "Sir, press from CNBC, Wall Street Daily, and the Chronicle are here. Board members in the green room." "Understood," he said, his tone clipped but not cold. As he walked past the mirrored wall, his own reflection caught his eye. He looked lighter, still powerful but not hollow. For a moment, he wondered if anyone else could see it. When the cameras rolled, James delivered what everyone expected. Confidence, eloquence, a perfect storm of corporate composure. But when the Q&A session came, something unexpected happened. A young reporter stood. "Mr. Sanders, people admire your success, but some say your company has become too mechanical, too profit-driven. No humanity. What's your response?" Normally, James would have answered with numbers and strategy. But today, he paused. "You're right," he said slowly. "For a long time, I thought efficiency meant success. I believed walls kept me safe. But sometimes, walls don't protect. They just keep the world out." The room went silent. Cameras leaned forward. Even Clara blinked, unsure how to spin this. "I lost sight of what mattered," James continued. "But I've recently been reminded that humanity isn't bad for business. It's what makes it worth doing in the first place." A hush rippled through the audience. It wasn't the kind of statement that made stock prices move, but it made people listen. When he stepped off the stage, Clara followed him. "Sir, that was personal." "It was honest," he replied simply. That evening, he came home earlier than usual. The house glowed softly in the dusk, golden lights spilling from the windows. He could hear faint laughter from the dining room. When he walked in, Emily looked up, her smile unguarded, her eyes lighting up the way the city lights used to for him. "You're home early," she said. He smiled faintly. "I think I've had enough boardrooms for one day." Mason looked up from his plate. "How was your big speech?" James chuckled. "Let's just say I may have shocked a few shareholders." Emily tilted her head. "In a good way?" "I think so," he said, taking a seat beside her. "I told the truth for once." After dinner, while the boys cleaned up, Emily joined him in the library. She handed him a glass of wine. "You looked tired," she said, softly. "Long day," he admitted. "But worth it." She sat across from him, legs folded beneath her, the soft glow of the fireplace reflecting in her eyes. "I saw a clip," she said. "You talked about walls. That was Britsy." He smiled faintly. "You said something to me once. That we were both learning to breathe again. I guess today was my first deep breath." Emily studied him quietly. "You've changed, James. You're different from the man who carried me out of that apartment." He leaned back, gaze steady. "Maybe you changed me." Her cheeks warmed. "Or maybe you just finally remembered who you were before the world hardened you." A pause hung between them, the kind filled with words neither dared say out loud. "Emily," he began, but she interrupted softly. "James, don't." He frowned slightly. "Don't what?" "Don't say something you'll feel guilty for later. I can see it in your eyes." He leaned forward, his voice quiet but certain. "I don't feel guilty for caring about you." Her lips parted. Silence fell. Heavy. Charged. "You're still healing," she whispered. "We both are." "Then maybe we can heal together," he said. The words hung in the air, raw, unpolished, real. The next morning, Emily woke early. She walked into the garden barefoot, breathing in the crisp air. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like a visitor in her own life. Behind her, James appeared quietly with 2 mugs of coffee. "You should wear shoes," he said, handing her one. She smiled. "And miss the feeling of grass?" "Never." They stood in silence for a moment, watching the sun rise over the fountain. Then Emily turned to him. "You know, when I first met you, I thought you were one of those men who saw life in terms of profit and loss." He smirked. "You weren't wrong." "But now," she said softly, "now I see someone who's remembering what love looks like." He didn't answer, but his hand brushed hers, and she didn't pull away. That afternoon, Mason received a call from the hospital. The doctor wanted to schedule Emily's follow-up tests. James offered to drive. The ride was quiet, comfortable, full of unspoken things. At the hospital, Emily met with her physician, and when she came out, her face was unreadable. "What did he say?" James asked gently. She exhaled. "My kidneys are improving faster than they expected. I won't need as many treatments." "That's good news," he said, smiling. "It is," she agreed. "But it also means I can start looking for work again. We can move back to the city." The smile faded slightly from his face. "Move back?" he repeated. She nodded slowly. "You've done enough for us. More than anyone ever has. But it's time we stand on our own again." He wanted to argue, to tell her to stay. But all he said was, "If that's what you want." She gave him a soft look. "I don't know what I want yet. That's the scary part." That night, James stood again in front of the locked door. Daniel's room. He took a deep breath, opened it, and walked inside. He sat on the small bed, the red toy car in his hand, and whispered into the still air, "I think you'd like her, son." The days that followed were uneasy, the kind of quiet that hums with things unsaid. Emily had started packing small boxes, nothing serious, just sorting things as she now mayer. Shar. But every folded shirt, every cleared drawer made the house feel less alive. James noticed everything. He noticed how she hesitated longer before laughing, how the coffee mugs she used to line on the counter stayed untouched, how she stood at the window at night, looking out like someone memorizing a view before leaving it. He didn't ask her to stay. Not yet. He told himself she needed freedom, not persuasion. But deep down, the thought of this house without her, without the sound of her voice and her gentle defiance, terrified him more than he cared to admit. One evening, he came home late from the office. The house was dim, the air faintly scented with lavender and rain. He walked into the living room and stopped. Emily sat curled on the couch, laptop on her knees, hair loose, dressed in one of his oversized sweaters. The sight disarmed him completely. "You're home," she said softly, glancing up. He nodded. "Late meeting." "You've been working a lot again." He paused. "Trying to convince myself I'm still good at it." Her eyes softened. "You never stopped being good at it, James. You just stopped letting it consume you." He studied her for a long moment. "And you helped me do that." She smiled faintly. "Then maybe my work here is done." That line hit harder than she meant it to. He took off his jacket, loosened his tie, and sat opposite her. "Don't say that." "Why not?" she asked gently. "Because I don't want you to go," he said, his voice lower, more raw than he intended. "I know you need to build your own life again, and I'll never stop you from doing that. But don't call this finished. What we built here, it matters." Emily's eyes glistened. "James?" "No, listen," he said, leaning forward. "For years, I lived in a mansion full of silence. I had money, success, everything except the one thing that makes any of it mean something. You brought that back. You and—" He caught himself before finishing. You and the boys, he said. Emily looked down at her hands, trembling slightly. You don't understand. This... She gestured between them. It's starting to feel like home. And that scares me. Because I don't know if it's real, or if it's just comfort after too much pain. He reached across the space between them, his hand hovering over hers before finally resting there. It's real, he said quietly, because comfort fades. But what do we have? It's growing roots. Rain started tapping softly against the tall windows. The sound filled the silence like a metronome between heartbeats. I got a job offer, Emily said finally. James's chest tightened. Where? A nonprofit in Boston, she replied. They help families dealing with long-term illness. It's meaningful work. And they'll cover my treatment. He nodded slowly, fighting the instinct to ask her not to go. When would you start? In 3 weeks. He exhaled, every breath feeling heavier. 3 weeks, he repeated quietly. It's not forever, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. It feels like it, he said before he could stop himself. Her gaze lifted. James? He stood abruptly, running a hand through his hair. I should be happy for you. I am happy for you. I just didn't realize how much space you'd taken up in my life until I imagined you gone. Emily's expression softened. That's not something to apologize for. He turned toward the window, staring out at the rain-slicked garden. You made this house human again, Emily. I don't know how to go back to quiet. She walked to him slowly, the faint scent of lavender following her. When she reached him, she placed a hand on his shoulder. Then don't go back, she said gently. Let it stay alive, even if I'm not here. He turned to face her. That's not the kind of alive I want. The honesty in his tone stopped her breath. James. He stepped closer, voice low, unguarded. Every time you walk into a room, it feels like light follows. And for the first time in years, I don't feel like I'm surviving. I feel like I'm living. You did that. She blinked back tears. You're making this harder than it already is. Maybe it's supposed to be hard, he said. Maybe that's what love is. Choosing the thing that scares you because it finally matters. Emily stared at him for a long moment, her breath trembling. James, are you sure this isn't guilt? Or gratitude? He shook his head. No, it's hope. The kind I thought I'd buried with my family. A tear slipped down her cheek. Don't say that word unless you mean it. He lifted her chin gently, forcing her to meet his eyes. I mean it, Emily. Every word. The distance between them evaporated. For a moment, it was just them. Two people who had spent years running from pain, finally colliding into something that felt like home. When he kissed her, it wasn't impulsive or dramatic. It was quiet, certain. The kind of kiss that feels like the world finally exhaled. She didn't pull away. When they finally broke apart, she whispered, I've waited so long to feel safe enough for this. And now? He asked softly. Now, she said, smiling faintly through her tears. I don't want to stop. Hours later, after she'd fallen asleep on the couch beside him, James sat quietly, watching the fire burn low. His phone buzzed on the table. An email from his assistant. Subject: Boston expansion, potential acquisition opportunity. He read it twice. Then, slowly, a smile formed. If Emily was moving to Boston, maybe it was time Sanders Enterprises did too. 3 weeks. That was all the time left before Emily would leave for Boston. The days moved differently now. Every sunrise, sharper. Every night, too short. The house that had once been an echo chamber now hummed with unspoken emotions. James found himself memorizing everything. The sound of her laugh echoing down the hall. The way she hummed while folding laundry. How her hand brushed her hair behind her ear when she was thinking. He caught these details like a man afraid they'd vanish the moment she stepped away. On a Wednesday morning, Emily stood at the kitchen counter, reading through an email from the nonprofit. "They've arranged housing for me," she said softly. "Just a small apartment, but it's close to the hospital." James, who'd been pretending to read the Financial Times, didn't look up. "That's good," he said evenly, though every word felt like gravel in his throat. "It's the right move," she continued, mostly to convince herself. "It's time I build something for myself again." He finally looked up. "You already have." Her brows furrowed. "What do you mean?" He folded the newspaper. "You built a family, Emily. You built me back from nothing." Her breath hitched, a mix of gratitude and pain. "Don't make me second-guess this," she whispered. "Maybe second-guessing is exactly what you need," he said quietly. She stared at him for a moment before walking away, unable to handle the weight of his gaze. Later that day, while Emily packed another box, Mrs. Sanchez entered with a cup of tea. "You know," she said, setting it down, "I've seen Mr. Sanders go through mergers, lawsuits, and board wars. But I've never seen him look like this." Emily smiled faintly. "Like what?" "Like a man trying not to break," Mrs. Sanchez replied. "Maybe ask yourself why." When the housekeeper left, Emily sank onto the bed, her heart pounding. The truth was, she did know why. She just wasn't sure she was brave enough to say it aloud. 2 nights before she was set to leave, James walked into the library with 2 glasses of wine. She was sitting by the window, her suitcase half-zipped beside her. He handed her a glass. "A goodbye toast," he said softly. She managed a smile. "You make it sound like I'm never coming back." He sat beside her. "Are you?" She hesitated. "I don't know." Silence settled between them like fog, the kind that made it hard to breathe. Then James said, "There's something I need to tell you." Emily looked up, wary. "James..." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small folder. "I bought the nonprofit in Boston." Her eyes widened. "What?" "It was struggling," he said calmly. "Underfunded, understaffed. I'm merging it with my company's charity arm. You'll still have full control. Same position, same mission. But now, you don't have to leave." She set her glass down, slowly. "You did all that for me?" "For us," he said simply. "You once told me to come back to life. Well, this is what living looks like. Not letting go of the things, the people, that matter." Her voice trembled. "James, I don't know what to say." "Say you'll stay," he whispered. She blinked, tears filling her eyes. "You think everything can be fixed with money. This isn't about money," he said firmly. "It's about choice. I've spent years watching everything I love disappear. I'm not letting that happen again. Not when I have the power to stop it." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I didn't fall for your power, James." He leaned closer, his voice breaking. "Then what did you fall for?" She looked at him, eyes wet and steady. "For the man who carried me out of that apartment. The one who sat in hospital hallways, until dawn. The one who laughed again after years of silence." He swallowed hard. "Then let me be that man every day. With you." For a moment, neither spoke. The air between them felt electric, fragile. Then Emily whispered, "What if I stay and we ruin it?" He smiled sadly. "What if you go and we never know what it could have been?" The next morning, sunlight streamed into the house like a quiet promise. Emily stood in the foyer, suitcase beside her. James waited near the door. Every part of him braced for her decision. She looked up at him, and for the first time, She didn't look uncertain. I called the nonprofit, she said softly. Told them I'd be running operations from here. For a second, James didn't move. Then his shoulders relaxed, and a rare, quiet smile spread across his face. So, he said, his voice low, you're staying. I'm staying, she confirmed. And before she could say anything more, he closed the distance between them and kissed her. Deep, certain, full of all the words they hadn't said. When they finally broke apart, Emily rested her forehead against his chest. You're impossible, she whispered, laughing through her tears. And you're home, he replied. Weeks later, Sanders Enterprises launched a new division, the Hope Initiative, a nationwide program providing funding for families in medical crisis. Emily served as its director. James, once the face of corporate stoicism, now appeared in interviews smiling, human, alive. At home, their days were ordinary. Shared breakfasts, late-night talks, long walks through the garden. But in that ordinariness, they found everything they'd once thought they'd lost. One evening, as the sun set over the lake, Emily turned to him and said, "You know, you never actually asked." He looked confused. "Asked what?" She smiled. "If I'd marry you." He laughed softly. "I figured action spoke louder." "Well," she teased, "maybe I want the words too." James took her hand, eyes warm and sure. "Emily Miller," he said, "will you marry me?" Tears glistened in her eyes. "Yes," she whispered. 1,000 times, yes. And that's how it ended. Not with tragedy, but with redemption. A man who once lived behind glass walls found love in a woman who refused to let him stay trapped. Together, they built something not out of wealth, but out of healing. Because sometimes the real fortune isn't what you earn, it's who you find when you finally open the door. Thank you for making it this far. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe, like, and share. Your support means the world to me. Every subscription, like, and share keeps this channel alive and growing. Drop your city or country in the comments, and I'll give you a personal shout-out in the next video.